Okay.
Madhuri, we are really happy to be able to talk to you and learn a lot from you since you have gained a lot of experiences. So I would like to give a very brief introduction about Madhuri. Her name is Madhuri Das Woudenberg, and she is the founder and director of the Goa School. And it is a school that and a program which she's been working on for the past 3 years, and it is all about spellbinding, mentoring, and learning experiences. She has learned a lot in her course of life. She has been through multiple jobs, experienced different places. She has worked not just in India but outside India as well, and she has gained a lot of experiences from those places. So today we will have a nice question answer session with her and get to know her and learn from her how, from the course of her life, she has been through with working in multiple places. So, yes, hello.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm usually the person doing the interview. Asking the questions. So it's quite different for me to be on the other side of the mic. But yeah, hopefully we can make it interesting.
All right. So, tell us something about your first job when you started up. You were pretty naive. You were getting to know yourself. You're getting to know your interests and hobbies. Definitely, you're figuring out a lot of things. So, at what age you started, and what was your first job, and what you learned from it?
Okay, nice question. Actually, I had decided long ago, like when I was in my 12th grade, that this is what I wanted to do with my life in terms of being involved with social work and development. And so I'd already studied for that, and I chose my master's course like that. And I also did a course in communications, and then I tried to marry those two things so that I would be doing that. Um, and I was in Bombay in those days. And actually, my very first job, which I don't even think it's on my CV, was with a small church organization. And I had done a lot of research throughout my masters. And in fact, people used to say, "Why don't you publish?" and this kind. So I published a paper, etc. But I would be like, they would be like, "Why don't you publish a book?" And I was like, I'm just 25. Who's going to like read a book written by a 25-year-old? Like, what will she know and all? So I basically thought it was silly, and I wanted to get straight into practice. But then this was a research organization, and they would be writing papers on the community work that they'd been doing. And so they said, "Will you come in and help us edit it and write it well and all?" So I was like, "Sure." But the thing I didn't know back then in the years in the like the early 90s, when the internet started with a dial tone, trrr, you people wouldn't realize how it was. But it was like really back in the day. And I didn't own a computer. So it was the first time that I was working on a computer. I didn't know how to type. So, the best thing I learned in that job, other than learning about their community work, was I learned how to type and I could fly at it by the end of that job, which is about 6 months. So I used to go there every afternoon and help them type up their notes. And by the end of 6 months, and I think maybe it helped that I was a pianist and I could move all my fingers because most other people would type like with one finger. So that was my first job. It was really down to earth and sweet, and I was so glad I was able to help somebody out.
Wow, that's great. Like you basically worked on your basics. Like that is so basic. Typing is needed for almost every job out there. So you got to work on your basics. You learned, you gained an experience, and that's great. And was it like a voluntary thing since you were doing for a church organization, or you
No,
had?
no, they would pay me back, and I think it was 4,500 rupees. And I was doing that along with like my communications course at St. Xavier's in Bombay. So it was
Oh,
lovely. I could
that's good.
use it to like with my friends go watch movies and stuff. It was nice.
Like a pocket money.
Pocket money. Yeah, you couldn't like pay rent or anything with it, but
Correct. True. Wow, that's great. So, later after that, at what age did you get into corporates, and what is your opinion about the corporate job and the entire lifestyle that involves a corporate job? Like it has a strict schedule and it has a lot of discipline in it. So, what is your opinion on it?
so I never worked with the for-profit sector, but what I did was I worked with very large NGOs. right? So, and these are run in a quote unquote corporate style in the sense that they have proper, divisions, departments, they're large, they have policies, how HR works, how finance works, how administration works, how you can travel, you know, things like that. I mean, they're like really large organizations. So, my second organization after this church one was called Point of View, and that was basically like a one woman show, right? It had a board and all that, but there was one anchor lady who used to walk it. She was really, her name was Bishaka, and I learned a lot from her, and she was somebody who had quite a big vision about, putting out more media to talk about women's rights. And so I learned all kinds of things there. I mean, like how to curate a photography show, perhaps, vicariously. I used to travel around talking to people about women's rights. In fact, I have this funny story. It's quite besides the point. I will come back to your question. But about going to Chennai and showing them this photo exhibition about women, which had a whole section on bodies, women's bodies. So they had close-up photographs of women's bodies with stretch marks and all. And we found all the children were like, seeing the whole exhibition, and every time they came to this section, they would like scurry past, like, and they wouldn't even stop to look, and they were like, oh, naked body. So then Bishaka and all said, listen, you please call an expert and organize a Q&A session, because this is in Madras Christian College. I mean, if one of the most forward thinking colleges in Chennai have this opinion, then like, at least they should start discussing things like sexuality and gender and things like that. So we did that. So it really opened my eyes, I mean, to that. And but again, I mean, going back to your question, there's only so much a small organization can do, and the scale of the problem is so big, right? So when you go to like a larger, more corporatized, quote unquote, NGO type place, then they have far more resources, right? And they can get to, like, if there's an emergency, they can get there right away. If there's a large problem, then they can go out, raise money for it, and really put huge programs into place. So this was my next job, I think, care, um, around, I would say, 99 or so, 1999 or so. And it was amazing. I mean, it was totally differently resourced and established. So I can remember, for example, when the Gujarat earthquake happened, um, I was somewhere else. And my boss rang me up and he said, you're in UP, you need to be in Gujarat, a huge earthquake has happened. And I was like, how do I get there? He said, just go to a travel agency, buy a ticket. So I looked and I called him and I said, there are no tickets. So he says, is there business class? So I was like, yeah. He said, buy business class ticket, you know. So that is what like a large organization is able to do. They recognize the emergency, they were able to put in the resources and get me out there front and center right away. And I mean, this is something I did time and again for emergencies, but we also did it for like being able to go into the interiors of India, etc. And really, for my job was to find out how our programs are working, to see the impact of it, and to document that either for donors or for learning within the organization or for learning within the NGO sector. So it was I mean, it was nice to be a part of that, but you really had to learn a lot of rules in terms of how to operate. Once you got that, then it was much easier.
That's great. And how did you deal so far in all of this journey? Like you would come across and be a founder of the Goa School, like throughout this session of your life, did you ever thought you'll be doing that?
Not till later, because I think at that time I was still learning and I was on the upward and onward, and I thought, there's so much to learn, so much to do, and I was always the sort of person that my team depended on a lot. So I just threw myself into work, and just my the object of the exercise was just to get as much done and in a high quality as possible, so that the most people would benefit from uh, the work that we were doing. So I didn't think of it then, but I thought of it later, and we'll come to
Oh,
that.
great. And coming on to you working in NGOs and dealing with bosses and how you said you have to be there and actions are taking place then and there in these kind of workplaces. How did you deal with bosses? Like, how was your experience in doing that, changing off them, and how did you cope up with it? Did you
Yeah.
ever come across like a bad boss, or maybe just it was too frustrating? Did you ever have those experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has that. And so after care, I joined USAID, which is the US aid department. And I was there only for a year. I think that's when I met my first band boss. But honestly, it was a combination of personality as well as the fact that I wasn't very comfortable with their philosophy. Um, I thought it would be a good change. I mean, I like went instantly to like a double salary, and you had to have a certain level of security to work in that office. And I was like a P11, which is rather senior, and all of that. I was only 30 years old, so it was amazing. In terms of what I thought the opportunity was going to be on paper. Um, but yeah, I mean, I had this lady boss who was Um, I don't know. I mean, like she was unnecessarily competitive with me, and I mean, like if I would finish something, she would just find fault with it and not let it go up, right? Because she wouldn't let the bosses see what I was doing. I don't know, just weird. It was just weird, right? And I was like, I don't know what this is, and so it was like a much less democratic organization. So one thing about an NGO is that if you're working for people with where you're saying have more inclusion, have more diversity, have more equal rights, etc., if that's what you're working for on the ground, then you automatically emulate those things within your organ as well, right? So we'd all gone to Bangkok, and we were all the communications people from USA all over the world, right? It was a huge room, and we were sitting. So like I was sitting like with the Indians and the Africans. We'd made one table at the back. So again, the Americans were in the whole room, and we were like on the fringes at the back. So that's the first thing, like right. And in a care or a save the children or wherever I work, like you would never do that. Like you had more power almost because you were a brown woman representing, you know, issues in the South. So you would be in the center. They would ask you first, things like that. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is, I remember they told us all to sit down and think about the new tagline as to what the tagline for USA should be. And eventually, it came out to be from the American people, which was straightforward. But people came up with different ideas, and finally, one lady got up and she said it should be bringing the best of the world to the rest of the world. And the whole, hall full of like some 500 people, they broke out in claps and all this. And we were sitting in the back, we were appalled. We were like, you can't say something like that. It's so non-inclusionary, non-diverse. I mean, like, you're just reflecting your point of view through that, right? And so, of course, I was being egged on in my African colleague. You say, and all you're articulate, you're unafraid, you say. So I stood up and I said, no, I don't think you can have a tagline like that. It just alienates everybody in the developing world. And my boss, this bad boss I was talking to you about, was right up in the front. And she was sort of hobnobbing with all the who's who in the top brass. And she grabbed the mic and she said, is that you, Madhuri? I don't want to imitate accents and all that, but it was like really weird. And she said, is that you? And then she said, so I said, yes, because she couldn't see. I mean, the hall was so big and I could barely see her as well. And she just said, sit down, And I was like, so, there was no space for dissent. I mean, it was just the most crazy place to work in that sense. So, difficult times. I mean, poor things. I mean, I, I mean, I shouldn't label an entire organization based on the experience with one or a few people.
Yeah.
And I do know that they did a lot around the world, but it was very difficult for me to fit neatly into that organization. So, of course, after a year, uh, I like left post haste and went back to care and begged back for my old job, which I did for a while. And on the way, I consulted for like Handicap International, where I learned a lot of things as well. People with disabilities, it was a new area for me. I had a whole team that I had to manage, and the team were people with disabilities. So they taught me so much about inclusion and things, And eventually I got my job at Care back because, I mean, I mean, I was somewhat of, like I'd left a bit of a vacuum after I left, so they were quite happy to have me back. But please note that even with USAID and before that with Care and all, I had a lot of experience on a lot of the sort of PR end of things, right? So like I used to write, like in USAID, I used to write like briefing notes for like American senators who used to come. And so I had to absorb like a whole lot of information, put it down like really succinctly. And it was such good training, I can't tell you, you know. And it was very, very interesting, that part of it. And I did the same for Care as well. And Meg Ryan, the actress that everybody knows, and I traveled with her to the salt pans of Gujarat. And it was so nice because the amount of visibility that she was able to give, the programs we were doing back in America, where the funds used to come from in those days, or the majority of the funds, it was just stunning. It was awesome. And but Care also didn't just say, okay, we have to have an ambassador like Meg Ryan. So, for example, after the Orissa cyclone, we'd been in the thick of it. So me and my colleague were actually sent off to the US for a month to do like a whistle stop fundraising tour, and we raised like $1 million. And to tell everybody about what had happened, it was ghastly. The stories we had were just awful, and obviously that was able to get people to give. And so I got a lot of experience in persuasion, in how to manage high level events, how to write really well, etc. So that was something that stood me in good stead all the way.
Great. So you basically made a comeback in care again, and you apparently had a good experience. That's good. And you also been visiting places like Chhattisgarh, Orissa. How was your experience in knowing the people there? And then, of course, there would be cultural differences. And then, especially
Yeah.
you're in a time, in a very sensitive time when they're going through something. How did you show them the care, and at the same time, how did you feel about it?
When I did my social work course, I used to fuss about going into the slums in Bombay because they used to send us in the rain, and it was rather ghastly. I mean, my whole impression from the north is when I came to Bombay that there's a crumbling, dying city, and like how can you go there, etc. So of course, my social work course just did their best to counsel me out of the course. They said, if you have this attitude, how can you really reach out to the people that you're going to try to benefit? I mean, you're fussing about just going there in the rain, you know. So I realized at that time that I just had to swallow it if I wanted to do this work, right? And so I did. And so in those days the rules used to be very strict also, like you couldn't wear sleeveless, you couldn't wear jeans, because generally your acceptance level was not going to be very high. But as now, nobody cares if you wear jeans and a t-shirt and walk around. I mean, they're not going to judge you, and they judge you based on what you're saying, although I still wouldn't do it. But even so, progress has changed. So when I first, so like over time, and like even in Bombay, like I used to go to Bhiwandi, for example, like the whole community that is sitting right on top of a rubbish dump. So by then I would just do it. I would make sure that I wasn't going like this place is not smelling right or whatever. You can't behave like that. I mean, you just can't, right? So I became a lot more humble. By the time I was traveling around in care, even if they may have sent me there, like say on a business class, once you got there, the whole thing was just so humbling because you saw the deep levels of poverty in which your country people were living. And it's hard to imagine, if you're in a city and you don't see it. So I'll give you a story, and I wrote about it, I think, once, where I went to Orissa. You asked about Orissa and Chhattisgarh. Now, these are very poor interior places of our country, right? Which care used to prioritize. So I went there, and they were doing a project where they were trying to give livestock to very poor families who didn't have farmland so that they would have some means of livelihood. And so I went there, and there was a hut that was literally like 4 inches off the ground. It was like a small car. And so I went in there and to meet everybody, and I saw the mum. What she explained through a translator was that the mum was boiling rice, and she was giving her kids the rice water as a meal because the rice had to remain in the pot, so she could put more water and boil it for the next meal. And even when I tell you a story like that, I mean, I still have goosebumps because I couldn't believe it. And I just thought it was so horribly unfair, and I couldn't understand what the systems in our country were that we couldn't even feed everything. And even though there's enough food, and I knew this, so once you know the policies and all that end of things, you think there's enough food in the country. There's just a problem with the distribution. But I was like, there are people who live like this in our country, and how can it be? So, I mean, I did have to deal with like a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, because it actually didn't have so much to do with my job. It had to do with me as a person. That how can this be, you know? So that used to get me. But then, luckily, because I was in a job where I had to channel those energies and do the storytelling in a way that it would help to bring in more funds so we could do more work and give people like that, methods to survive, etc. It was better for me because as I'm saying, I was able to channel those ideas. Well, I saw a lot of things. I mean, like for example, once they sent me to Thailand and Cambodia to make a film about sex work. And over there, I learned that small children and would be like hidden by their mothers while they were at sex work, and there would be like no fathers around because these were like children of sex workers. And like so in Myanmar and Bangladesh and some of these places, they paint their faces white. It's almost like you wear a mask when you go out to sex work. And it's part of their, I don't know whether it's geisha like or what, but they do that. And the children don't know what it's for, like, right? And they put that on so that people know they're working now, and maybe perhaps it's a little more impersonal between them and whoever's coming in. Now the children don't know why this white paint goes on, right? So they were all sitting outside, and they all made to sit outside, like in a shed, in a little place where they all meet, and care was trying to make sure that they get some food and they get some activities in and blah blah. And so this interview was happening inside a very small space. So I set it up and all that, and I allowed them to do it. And I moved out and I went to see the kids, and they were painting with brushes and all, and they had canvases and all that. And after 2 minutes, there was this 3-year-old child who just took the white paint and began painting her face because that's everything that she'd seen. So again, I'd be like, you know, how much can you change? There's a culture that is steeped so much in this, and unless you don't actually remove that child from that environment, is it working? I mean, I would have all these questions, right? So yeah, I mean, I would be fairly moved and fairly disturbed most of the time. But as I said, I was able to really perform quite high and quite well, perhaps also because I was young, and channel that. So it worked well. So thank you for that
That,
question. That's a good question.
that's really good. That's a very humbling experience that you had in your life. And this is like all your experiences that you gained while working in India in different states. How about at certain point did you move out for a job opportunity? What was that shift of lifestyle for you?
Um, well, I mean, safe to say that I just had to sink or swim. So, I just took to it immediately. And my role just grew very fast, very quickly. So I was in my early 30s and I was selected to be part of senior management team in Save the Children that first looked at so it was like a regional office that looked after South Asia. So suddenly you had to pop out from India and then, figure out what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in Bangladesh, what's happening in Sri Lanka, etc., Afghanistan. And then so my palette became international and I went from South Asia to all of Asia. and eventually to Africa with a secondment to London in the middle for change management. Um, well, not to London, but to the London office. One thing you have to realize that once people become very international, they kind of live elsewhere and work with different teams, right? So I managed to live mostly through uh, that time, mostly in India. But I used to report into Bangkok, and then I did move over to Africa when the time came because it was too far. Um, but that was also very good because I had my mom who had become quite ill at that time, and so I was able to work from home. And these were all very far advanced concepts that these organizations were allowing well before COVID. I mean, this was like in 2009, 2010, right? Um, so now again, I mean, the thing is that you had that grounding because India is so diverse, India's got so many issues that you already had that background. But the thing that was different was that all these different countries presented slightly different problems. They were in different stages of development. They had different styles of government. They had different kinds of traditional communication or things like that. And it was my job to see that we could run campaigns in all these countries. So I had to very quickly understand each country, and then to run those campaigns in those countries, you had to be involved with the recruitment, the training, the assessment of like the office capacity, then the actual impact of what was going on after you put things in place. Uh, it was a lot and very fast, and yeah, I just had to keep learning and delivering. And in terms of the interesting stories that I have, I mean, I have so many. I guess my friends who I have a drink with now and again, they know all these stories. But I think it's useful to tell because you do learn a lot. So, like for example, in Afghanistan, to run a campaign was so difficult. So they had the Taliban. So when I was working in Afghanistan, they had the US presence there. There was no Taliban government, but they had been one before. And now you're talking about when it has come back, right? So, but the people we had to recruit, even though they were young adults at the time that there was no Taliban government, they had grown up during the Taliban, right? So, how do you recruit somebody who's had zero, and especially women, like, who had almost zero education, and they would tell us stories like we would learn from our books, and we would keep needlework under the table, and the minute the Taliban walked in, they would put the books underneath and put the needlework on top. So there were those challenges, and then there were also like, I mean, this is like dark humor. If I ever write a book, I'll put it in. I mean, I remember once we were having a big meeting, and we were talking about who we wanted to target with our advocacy messages around child survival. And so we had these big charts in the room saying target, and we'd written the minister's name and all that. And suddenly, in the middle of our meeting, in walked these armed fellows, yeah, from somewhere, I don't know. They were all armed and they looked like if you said anything wrong, they would like to shoot you, right? And they were reading all these posters saying target the minister and this and that. I was like, what are we going to do? I mean, are they going to open fire? Are they going to arrest us? What's going to happen? And it was a real problem to deal with. And I'm not just joking. Luckily, I mean, I think they just went by because we had people in the organization who had links with them and they popped up from somewhere and said, no, no, this is just a training and all that. And so we were sort of quote unquote saved. But it was like that. I mean, you went into a restaurant, you had to leave. There was a sign saying, leave your firearms outside. I mean, that's how it was in Afghanistan, right? And of course, for us, it was very difficult because we did have like a staff member who we thought had been kidnapped um, during our time there. And in the movies they show you, like a plane comes and you like run and you jump on the plane and it runs away and you can just be saved from this situation.
Oh,
When
like
they have an escape
dramatic.
plan, is nothing like that.
Mm.
Yeah, it's nothing like that. You have to buy a ticket to get out of the country, a commercial liner, and then you don't find any tickets. And then so you have to wait 15 days, and this is how you have to be to exit in an emergency because they basically said, you can leave now because it's not safe to be here anymore. It was a time when, there's a proxy war that was happening in that time between, I think, India and Pakistan. So if you were Indian or Pakistani, you were at risk. So we had to leave, and it was really funny. And you know, sometimes a bomb would like go off, and then it would be on BBC. Like even before I could ring up and tell everybody at home that it is on the way to the airport. I was on the way to the airport, but I didn't get caught in that bomb. So I think it was more traumatic. It was very traumatic for my family, but it was also traumatic for me. I mean, I remember lying. You had to pack a grab bag, right, and keep it ready at all times. That if somebody comes, you pick up that bag and run. It's got your passport, your money, your papers, so that you just leave everything else and you can escape. So at that time, I'd be lying on my bed, fully clothed. At night, I wouldn't take like undress or anything. Keep my shoes on as well, so I could get up and run. And it brought a lot of things into focus, like you know whom do you really care about, what do you really really value on this life, what will you do if you can escape, etc. So it was quite amazing. I mean, somebody had to do it. It was an adventure, but I can say that about after about 5 trips there under these really strange circumstances, I was like, I don't want to go back. And many years later, during an emergency training, oddly after the fact, um, I remember this man, he quote unquote kidnapped me, put a black. I mean, this was, they were just play acting to show you like how things happen in the training. So he came with this big black hood, put it on me, threw me to the ground, put his boot on the back of my neck, and he was shouting horrible expletives. This is some village in England somewhere we were doing this training. And I just started bawling. Yeah. I was like, I knew it was a game. I knew it was a setup. But I was just like, "Bruh, I couldn't take it." And then later on, I remember our advisors and all told us that you probably have PTSD. You go get it checked. I never did. I just lived through it. But I mean, it's not easy. I mean, like you do know that it is very stressful, and I still have a lot of regard. And I'm grateful that I was able to do it in my life. For people who go into these very, very difficult zones, and you have right now like so many wars going on, etc. So that was one experience. And the difficulties actually don't only come from war or trouble like that. I mean, I can one other example, and then I carry on. I have so many stories. It's not funny, but the other one is Mongolia, where the temperatures are minus 22, 25. And I've never been so cold in my life. I mean, the snot in my nose would freeze, right? I would get not frostbite, but I would feel like my arms are falling off my shoulders, right? It was so cold. And I had gone to one place called Dornod, which is miles away from Ulaanbaatar, right? Like the other end of the country. And so I flew there, and when I went to fly back, they said, "Oh, a plane's not coming today." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they were like, "It's Independence Day, so it's a holiday." I said, "So why did you sell me the ticket? It's got the date on it, right?" They were like, "We don't know, I'll come tomorrow." But then I couldn't come tomorrow because I had to go back. I had to fly that night back to Beijing and then back to, I'd miss all my connections. And I was like, no, no. So then the staff very sweetly said, all right, we will drive you in a convoy, right? So we went in these jeeps, which they call machines there. And halfway through, of course, one jeep stopped working. But the convoy could not leave that one jeep behind because it was certain death. You can't be left in such cold where there's nobody. I mean, it's like a Martian landscape. There's nothing happening on the left and right of you, nobody for miles. So we had to wait. And eventually, it took hours for them to fix it. And then finally, the convoy left. And then we came to a place called Hinti, which was somewhere in the middle. And then because it was like the Independence Day or something like that, um, we went into like a restaurant to eat, and they were serving vodka outside the door. And I was like, oh, I don't know, and all. Because, I was at work and you can't, normally you don't drink at work and stuff. And they were like, just drink it because you will die otherwise of the cold. And I was like, I was literally like that. So, yeah, I like whacked the vodka and I was fine. So it really does warm you up. So now you know why they drink vodka in cold countries. But anyway, so I mean, there were stories like that, and for me to really imagine that this is their daily life, and they are able to reach like children of like shepherds being herded like on some Mongolian steppe where there's nothing around. That's pretty amazing, yeah. it's amazing what, if you have a strong organizational backing, what we can achieve. So that's what I learned.
How was your experience being there in Africa? And where were you in Africa, though?
So yeah, I mean, I was in South Africa, which is like any developed country, really. I mean, except for its history. Um, so that was a bit of cheating, but I mean, in the sense that, I guess the team decided to be in a place where communications were good, etc. But my beat was East and Southern Africa, which is English speaking, and the rest of Africa is mostly French speaking. So, and I didn't speak French, so I was not able to work there. But yeah, it was, Africa is humbling. But the thing about Africa is that there's such a movement around there. There's so many countries. There's so much work going on. There are proud people. There's so much to learn from them. I mean, they don't think of themselves as second class. I mean, they'll anymore. It's just growth, and it's amazing. I mean, and they have a lot to catch up with. Obviously, they have the same issues that we do in Asia, which is that they've got to think about education, they've got to think about livelihoods, they've got to think about health, things like that. But really, I mean, the culture is so strong, and I came back an absolute fan. Yeah, but I mean, I had so many life-changing experiences there as well. I mean, I could be going on forever, but maybe I can just pick one. Um, which one should I pick? So many. Okay, I'll pick this one time we were doing a meeting um, in a place which is where there was a big museum about it's called the Apartheid Museum in South Africa, and it's a big museum that shows you all the struggles that the South African people went through during apartheid, which I'm sure you've learned about. Everybody's learned about in school, which is that whole thing where black and white people were not allowed to have
Right.
the same lives at all, right? White people governed all the resources, they were in charge, and then this was close to slavery, right? In terms of how they would be treated. And it was Nelson Mandela, of course, who brought all of that into the fore and his movement. So, I read up about that. I'd seen the movies and all that. And we were sitting in the middle of that apartheid museum, and we were talking about the rights of, like women and children, and how they've progressed around the world. And for me, it was a goosebump movement. I mean, to just be part of that whole conversation. We had the African elders there, and we had people like from India and from different places, who've been part of all these movements. It was just awesome. And then afterwards, like, uh, we would do things like singing and singing songs of change, etc. It was just those were those are like some of my best moments there. So yeah.
That's great. Any advice I would ask you for like dealing with colleagues if you're not getting along? What advice would you give on that?
um, there are 3 or 4 ways around it. I mean, one is to just leave it, and to acknowledge that we don't like each other, or we are just not able to work together. We have come from different perspectives perhaps. And so if that happens, then you just acknowledge it. And if you're both quite evolved, then you're not like, like saying snide things to each other. You're just being professional and getting your work done. So that's one. And you have to train yourself not to react if that does happen. If like others are saying that to you. The second is that you can try to confront it. You can put people in a room and talk about it. But it requires a certain level of maturity from all sides. And if that doesn't exist, it can actually make it worse because they were like, "Oh, they called me to Rome and they said this." So it actually ends up escalating what might have become a non-issue. But so you have to take that risk. Um, and I guess when people are just I mean, it does happen, and some people just try to villainize you. They try to say that, you're not doing well and try to show you down. And I mean, one way is that, nobody can hide your experience. Nobody can say that you're not good at your work, right? So, if those two bits are strong, then they will try to attack your personality because there's really little else to attack. And again, there you just have to be mentally strong and try and win them over with logic or with care or with trying to tell them, hey, I'm also just a human. And if you do this to me, even my family will suffer, I will suffer, So, but sometimes it doesn't work. So then you just have to exit gracefully and
Great.
that.
That's so
Yeah.
good.
I mean,
So,
it's true. The thing is that, I mean, I haven't really spoken about office politics too much. And the truth is that it's there everywhere. And if you're the sort of person who puts your head down and just gets a massive amount of work done, then whether they like you or they don't like you, they will keep on giving you work because you're the workhorse, right? And it took me, I had to be nearly 45 years old before I realized that I'm taking too much stress, right? And when I'm taking too much stress is when I'm like, why should I do all this work? A, I'm not paid for it. B, everybody else in the team tends to slack off or take you for granted, right? And if you can't say that, if you can't have a conversation about that, or if it's not being accepted, right? And then you start saying no to work, that's when it gets flagged as, oh, you said no to this. But then they don't see that you have been carrying six people's work all this time. Right?
hmm,
So then it becomes a little difficult, and if you don't have like a good manager, or if you don't have, or in my case, if I was in the team that was managing others, if you can't recognize that, if you can't just you know help that person to deal with the stress, then it doesn't work. I mean, I myself been in situations where there's so much stress involved, and stress, by the way, comes from personal things. It comes from different places, right? So this person is trying to do their best in the office, and if you just add more pressure to them, they will wilt, right? I've been in a situation where I've been literally weeping because I can't understand how people I thought so much of before have suddenly become almost like animals. They just can't, they're like not human. They're not able to, they just like, like doing that whole hyena thing. And they just, I mean, it becomes like that. And it can become like that. And it's poor management, basically, when if that ever happens to teams. But if it becomes like that, then you have to just quietly exit because it's not worth it. Nothing in the world is worth that. You lose
true.
sight of basically what the organization exists for. You lose sight of what work you're trying to do. Right? You shouldn't hang around.
Yeah. Yeah, for any
Um,
organization, I believe you should always remember your cause and purpose of why you gathered all of this that you have. And in all of that, if you bring competition and too much politics, and you're basically ruining the whole purpose of it. So I surely very much agree to what you just said. And I would like to ask you, so you moved back to India later after that, right? And you got your job back as well, or did you
Mhm.
work
Yeah.
in a new firm? Where what happened? So I would like to
Got
know
a
from there.
different job. Well, I moved eventually because at the end of my stint in Africa, they were like, okay, we're analyzing. And, so I had to either live abroad on a local salary or come back. And when you're abroad, actually, you're maintaining two establishments, right? Because you
Correct.
haven't fully moved out of your home as well at home. So I was like, okay, I'll come back. And then it was a shock because, of course, I had been used to being fairly senior and getting pots of money and stuff like that. I mean, not pots, but more than enough, right? And suddenly I had to take this huge salary dip. And for me, luckily, I didn't need to like keep earning and earning and earning, right? I mean, for me, it was more about the cause. So I was able to move into that dip quite well. But on the other hand, I had a lot of colleagues who used to face the same thing. And especially when you come back from a country that is seemingly more organized than yours, then you kind of like, because our country is like really is tumultuous, right? There's so many people, there's so many problems, etc. It becomes a bit of a reverse culture shock, right? So, For me, I mean, maybe it wouldn't have been that bad, but I, of course, landed up again in Bombay, which I've always unfortunately thought that Bombay is like a crumbling, disintegrating city. So that was my next job. It was like with the World Resources Institute. And interestingly, of course, the work was all about that. It was about how do you build a sustainable city? How do you build sustainable transport systems? You know, what energy system should you use, etc. So my learning was deep and wide, and it was really good. I spent only a year there, but again, I mean, you know, there's politics and all of that. And I also met my husband by then, and I was kind of like, you know, I want to now start this lovely part of my life, and I don't want to be bogged down by this disintegrating city. So I moved, and also I got this opportunity at the Global Development Network, where my even though I would say my salary, because it was headquartered in the Global South, which was in New Delhi, my salary still remained like I was an Indian working in India. So I never made up that, you know, those high salaries I was having earlier, never made up the gap. But I went back to a global palette. So that was very nice for me because, you know, I was able to learn much more. So, for instance, I went to South America for the first time with them, um, looked at, you know, countries there. I went to Peru, which is a different country, of course, and then, you know, so but it opened up my mind. You know, the thing is, you might read something or hear something, but you know, till you don't, especially and even with Africa. I mean, in India, we don't even read about Africa as much as you do, say, in Europe or the UK. So, you know, it opens up your mind to different things, and you know, you work with people who are from like a more Spanish background. It's different, all of that. So again, you're wrapping your head around names you may not have heard. All of that starts again, right? So yeah, I mean, so that was very nice for me. Also, the work was economic research. So you know the whole everything around development, so the whole gamut. So you know you read up on that, you learned so much. You learned about biodiversity, you learned about I don't know, like public health, or you know, different things, right, that the organization was working on. So it was really amazing. My learning was amazing.
That's so good. So yeah, coming to the transition of doing what you're doing now, as I asked in the beginning, I will ask again, is that at this point, your journey might have took you to the idea and the whole big plan that you had was the Goa School. And it was an idea of you and your partner as well, right? Um,
Mhm.
and but you accomplished it eventually. So how was your journey in that and the losses that you had? I'm pretty sure it was like 3 years it took time for you to build up that trust eventually. So what are the losses or the backlashes that you faced while doing it from your experience being a founder of the Goa School?
I came out of this development sector being obsessed with impact. So, you know, and then me and my husband have all these conversations. We say, okay, what is it that we can do? Because we are not like a USAID or a big donor, and we don't have that kind of money. So, what is it that can we do? And we realized that we were sitting between the two of us, and he was a Dutchman, of course, so he had this long, illustrious career in the Netherlands. So both of us were sitting on like this gold mine of connections, human connections, right? And we said, how can we bring them back in a way where you can then use those connections and what they know within that network back into society? And so then that magical idea was born of the Goa School, where we said, okay, we will ask people to compete for positions where they then will have, as a fellow of the Goa School, access to what we would say cutting edge information and cutting edge experiences from people from all over the globe. And I would reign in my network, he would reign in his, and this is how we would, you know, so whatever we were talking about. And he, of course, his area was more around design and communications, which he thinks is central, which he thought of as central to any work that you do, is absolutely 100% right. And me, I wanted to be able to bring in the development thinking side of things, you know, where you know once a human understands like all the areas of development that need to happen for a good life, then you automatically start pursuing that, right? You start changing yourself, you start making small changes in your environment, and you lead your life. But at the end of the day, you yourself can drive that change towards a more healthy, well to do, prosperous, and satisfying life, right? And to become, I would say, like an active citizen in whichever area that you're in. So that was the thinking behind the Goa School. And I would say, if you ask me, like, when do you start thinking about it, it would be, I would say, somewhere towards my move back from Africa. Because one of the other things is that when you move back from another country and you keep saying, well, you've been running around the whole world doing this, whereas in your own backyard, there's all this going on. So how can you just sit in one gated community and drive your fancy car and say there's nothing to do with me? Of course not. And until one doesn't engage, one doesn't uh, try to become a part of that development story, development will never come. So, yeah, that's where it started.
That is so good. It was great talking to you, Madhuri, and knowing you so much with all your experiences. And as you are the founder and director of the Goa School, I can see all the experiences that you had made you so humble, had great leadership skills, made you so brave, and how persuasive you got with all those experiences. And now that you've formed this great community of Goa School with all the fellows there and all the fellow members. And yeah, it was great knowing you and your experiences with that. And I like how obsessed you are with having impacts and how passionate you are. And something that I would say you and your partner really thought when you were thinking of Goa School was to have human connections and the authenticity of it, basically. In nowadays, we can find human connections, but there is no authenticity. But in Goa School, you can surely feel that. So that is something I myself also felt it. Yeah, it was great talking to you and I really learned a lot from you in this session. And I hope that whatever I have learned from you, I surely would apply it for myself also. And for you, how it started from communications and typing, where you ended now, that whole timeline was just so amazing to see. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
And not at all. Thank you, Stephanie. And it's a marvelous thing that you, as a fellow of the Goa School, have been able to whip up this event together and host it so beautifully. So thank you for doing that. And I hope that all these stories from me are going to be of some use to somewhere along the line, to someone somewhere along the line. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for me as well.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.